You're listening to Reforming the Ozarks, a podcast serving the local church in Southwest Missouri with biblical teaching and Reformed theology. To learn more about our churches, please visit ctkjoplin.com and gospelsgf.org.
Welcome back to Reforming the Ozarks, episode 20. If I'm counting right, this is episode 20. And it is a snow day in the Ozarks. So school's out. Streets are icy and cold, but we're still here. No days off, even though we didn't have an episode last week, actually.
Right.
But no days off, though. No days off. But it's good to be back with you all. I decided that I was just going to stay home, so I don't have any awesome books or stained glass behind me today. I'm just in the spare room at home. I did bring, though, some PCA gear with me here, my PCA coffee mug. So I do have some decoration here in the little home office. But good to be back with you all. We have Dustin and Ray back as always. We also have our special guest Aaron Rains back with us today for another special episode. Even though he made an unsolicited comment about the Ozarks and Arkansas being better last time he was on, we decided we'd still have him back to help us discuss what we're going to talk about today. Before I get into that, though,
just want to show I'm doing some penance. I'm wearing my Billy Gales hat, Branson, Missouri, representing, and this is a high holy day. That's right. The St. Louis Cardinals pitchers and catchers are reporting. So I got my Cardinals gear on. So I am giving honor and doing homage to the great state of Missouri, where there are some Ozarks.
Very good. Thank you. This was the penance that we gave to you to do to be back on the show. So yeah. But it's good to be back with you both, and good to have you on. So yeah, Dustin, Aaron, how are you both doing on this snowy, cold day?
Good over here up in Springfield. News to me about baseball, but my wife will be happy to know that something is happening for baseball. So, we're good up here. We've got a very exciting Sunday coming up. This coming Sunday, the 16th, we are having our first yet unofficial congregational meeting, and so right after worship at the church, and we are talking about the things that the Lord has done in 2024. We're looking ahead to prayers and plans for 2025, giving folks a financial update, and doing some Q&A after the meeting, just helping people see the things, ask questions and get some clarification on things. And we'll talk about vision and values and all sorts of really exciting things. So I'm really, really excited. I feel like it'll be an important Sunday in our life and the life of our church, Gospel Fellowship. So look forward to that.
That'll be great. Yeah, that's really exciting.
Yeah.
And Aaron, how's everything going down in Bentonville?
We are plugging along. It is another normal day as far as I know in Bentonville. We did get some ice. I think it's even coming down right now, so I'm sure it's more quiet around here than normal. We did have to cancel our ladies' Bible study that we usually have on Wednesdays at the church, but we'll pick that back up next week. But yeah, we are just plugging along. We're in that stretch that kind of goes from Christmas till spring, where it just feels like every week is the same over and over again, and you just gotta plug through. But the sun is coming, and as the weather warms up, so will a lot of the church events be heating up. And we're grateful for simple means of grace and regular rhythms at our church. They get us through even the dark weeks of winter.
Mm-hmm.
Amen. Absolutely. Yeah, I was just looking at the different closings on the news website, and that's one of the things living in the Bible Belt. You have all the schools that announce their closings, and you also have all the churches that have their Wednesday nights stuff listed there that they're closing as well. So, yeah, we are excited to get out of this. We had one Sunday of Fool's Spring, and it was like 70, and now we're back in the winter. So hopefully it'll work its way out soon.
Yep.
All right. Well, what are we talking about today? We wanted Aaron to come back because we're going to take a break, and we're not going to talk about. We've been going through the order of worship stuff. Take a break from that because we wanted to talk about presbytery and Presbyterianism and things like that. We just had our most recent presbytery meeting this past Saturday for the Hills and Plains Presbytery. So what we wanted to do on this episode is, first of all, start off just going through talking about, if you're not familiar with the way our churches are structured and the way presbyteries function and just the whole thing about what our PCA churches, how they work and operate. We wanted to start and just work through some of those things. If you've been part of the PCA, if you're listening to this and you want to just hear a recap of the Hills and Plains meeting, we'll put a link somewhere that you can just skip ahead to whenever we get into that. So the second half of this episode, we're going to just do a recap from the meeting on this past Saturday, talk about some of the highlights and some of the things that stood out to us there. But to start, what we want to do is just talk about Presbyterianism in general. And to start us off, I'll just ask you guys, and we'll kick around a few questions. But first of all, what is a presbytery? Anybody want to take that one? What when we talk about a presbytery, what are we talking about?
I'll jump in and then get corrected. How about that? So a presbytery is usually a geographic region where of churches, a geographic region where the churches in that region make up that presbytery, that level of united churches. And so our presbytery, for example, is the Hills and Plains Presbytery. And so it is made up of the PCA churches in Oklahoma, Northwest Arkansas, and Southwest Missouri. And so it is made up. So that's the area of our presbytery, and the constituents are those churches, but specifically, it is those pastors or teaching elders that make up the presbytery, and then the delegates, or I'm looking for a C word, commissioners from those churches. They have a certain number of ruling elders that also get to participate, whom we need to participate in the business of the church, handling out its governmental needs. So, yeah, how would y'all say that differently or add to that?
So we talk about how our church structure is a series of graded courts. And so at your local congregation, you have the court of the session, which are the ruling elders and the senior and any associate pastors that may be there. The presbytery is that next level up as far as courts go, and it has oversight in the geographical area, like Dustin mentioned. It has oversight and care for all of those churches and also the teaching elders, the pastors that are there. And so the interaction that you get from your local congregation all the way up to the General Assembly actually runs through the presbytery. And it should be not merely administrative and governmental, but there are shepherding and pastoring and care aspects for why a presbytery exists, and how through the connectedness of our churches we help serve and love one another in ministry. Strictly speaking, the presbytery is made up of the teaching elders and their churches, so it is the the particular churches themselves that are members of the presbytery along with the teaching elders. But when we get together for a meeting, as Dustin mentioned, the men that are there that may participate in the meeting are all of the teaching elders and ruling elders representing those churches who are members of the presbytery.
Thank you. That's good. Yes.
So what is so at Christ the King in the adult Sunday school class, we just started a new topic working through some American Presbyterian history. And this past Sunday, we kind of just did like an overview. What are some Presbyterian distinctives in theology and church structure and things like that? So we talked a bit about this, but we talk about Presbyterian form of government, presbytery. The Greek word presbyter is the word for elder. So at a very basic level, Presbyterianism is a form of government where elders are leading and governing and have authority within the church. What are some other ways that churches can structure themselves? Or another way to put it is, every church has to have some kind of structure. Even the non-denominational church down the street, they're governed somehow, and it might just be like a corporate kind of structure that doesn't really involve much input from their members. They might not even have official membership. But what are some other ways that churches can structure themselves, and why do we think that the Presbyterian way is biblical and preferred?
Yeah, so Gospel Fellowship meets in a Methodist church. And in distinction from a Presbyterian form of government, a Methodist congregation, a Methodist church, the Methodist church has an Episcopal form of government. And episkopos is the Greek word for our English and Latin word bishop. I don't know the Latin actually for that. I assume so. But I have swung for the fences on that. Anyway, but so within an Episcopal form of government, they also have either dioceses or conferences. They have geographical regions for their churches. But whereas in a Presbyterian church, you've got your congregation, and then you've got above leading them, you've got a few elders, right? In an Episcopal form of government, back to Presbyterian, you've got a plurality of elders, right? There's no one person making decisions. But in an Episcopal form, as you get up to beyond your local, you might have a local board of directors or something, but not far up, you've got a single person making decisions for people below. And these would be understood as those bishops. So it does bottleneck, and that's not a pejorative term, although we don't follow that form. It does narrow into a single individual, bishops, and then those bishops are in some group, and I don't know the name of the group, that make up, and they answer to an archbishop, the head bishop, and so it narrows from group to one person. Whereas in Presbyterian structure, it always stays plurality of elders. There's no one person making decisions.
Yeah.
Another common form of church government is congregational, where every decision that gets made requires a congregational meeting and a congregational vote. And typically, congregational churches are also not connected to any other churches. And so whatever is going to be done in that local congregation is disconnected from what any other church will be doing. And every decision that has to be made by the people who constitute that congregation, whether it be budget or leadership or even accepting members to the church. And so that is another common form.
Yeah. And sometimes those churches will still have elders. They might be like an elder-led kind of congregational church or elder-ruled. Like they might determine within themselves what authorities given to the elders, what responsibilities remain with the congregation. So where we're different, though, is we have a structured book of church order that clearly defines for us, here's the responsibility of elders at every level. Here's the responsibility or the rights of the members of the congregation and what they still are required to do, and things like that. And it goes up from there, from the local elders of the church, which is the session, up to the presbytery, and then up to the general assembly.
That's an important point, because there's a distinction between elder led and elder ruled, which might be too picayune for us to dive into, but there are independent congregations that might even be elder ruled. Presbyterian churches are elder ruled. The difference being the connectedness means even in that local session, local congregation, there is accountability for those elders through our series of graded courts. Whereas independent elder-ruled churches, the buck stops at the session. They may not call it a session, they may call it an elder board or whatever. But there is no accountability for those men. If they make a decision, it is final, and there is no higher court to which the members of the church can appeal. And in some ways, I think that's the most dangerous form of church government, because it has the appearance. It is trying to be biblical in seeing the call for elders to rule the church, and it has the appearance of accountability, but you have the tyranny of the few that can always happen with no recourse for an abusive session, an abusive group of elders, where a member has somewhere they can go to get that accountability for the elders over them. And so when we talk about Presbyterianism, it's not merely the elder rule, that's one aspect, but also the connectedness that goes with that, which brings accountability to all of us, which makes it safer for the people in our congregations and for the elders. And it brings in the wisdom of the most men that God has called to serve in the office of elder, which is one of the great benefits of Presbyterianism.
Yeah, that gets into one of the other things we wanted to talk about, is why we think this is biblical, and also why it's so important. We do think it's biblical. We don't really need to get into all that right now, but we think
we have a previous episode where we talked about the biblical examples of that.
Yeah. So we did talk about church officers and some things like that. So you can go listen to that episode too.
Link below.
What's that?
Link below.
Link. Yes, we'll link it. I'll point up here like an actual YouTuber. And then I'm not going to put anything there because that's just too much work. But some of the reasons why it's so important, though, is, and we could talk forever about some examples and some in our own experiences, but also stories we've heard. And just one example, I had some friends who are part of a church that is elder-led, I think is how they describe it, though the elders do make certain decisions, and that can be somewhat of a fuzzy line at times. But, sometimes it's just a matter of communication. And they were just kind of talking about how they felt like they needed to have more communication. And that's always an issue, and that's an issue can be an issue in our churches as well. But wouldn't it be helpful if there was a book of church order that had stipulations in it where members can call congregational meetings if they need to, if they feel like they're not receiving information or that their elders are not acting in a way that that the congregation feels like they should be acting. We have that spelled out in our book of church order. Here's how the members themselves can call a congregational meeting. So there's all kinds of examples like that there's accountability, there's clear guidelines and expectations, of how all of these things are supposed to work. There's clearly delineated. Here's the responsibility of the session and what they're in charge of. Things like that. So, any other examples you guys have of or thoughts about that? Why this is such an important way to handle church government?
Well, I think specifically addressing some concerns that an independent church may have, independent or a Southern Baptist church, for example. They do have to answer to the denomination to a degree, but in a lot of ways they have they're autonomous, as self-described, and they may say, well, I don't want another body coming in and telling us what we have to do, especially if they're not faithful, not orthodox, right? Which we know of Presbyterian denominations who are no longer faithful, and that's a concern. And so one of the things that we do is we have checks and balances, right? Even within the relationship between a local church and a local session and the presbytery. There are some things that a presbytery cannot do in a local church. For example, the presbytery cannot appoint officers in a local congregation. The congregation itself has to do that. But the local congregation has to wait for the presbytery to admit a man into the presbytery so that he can then be their local pastor, right? So there's checks and balances that safeguard both the congregation and the presbytery, because we need the presbytery to be made up of faithful men so that they can the presbytery can be a faithful body interacting with its local congregations.
Yeah, that's a great point, because that's true for all of us. When I took the call, Christ the King called me to be their pastor, but that was dependent upon me transferring in to the Hills and Plains Presbytery. And Hills and Plains, they had the right to examine me, which they did, and my beliefs and my views on issues, and then when I'm approved by Presbytery, and they approve my call as well, they do all those things. So just like you're saying, and that's true for Aaron when he was a ruling elder first, and you can share more if you want to, Aaron. But yeah, you're a ruling elder, and then were ordained as a teaching elder, and you went through Presbytery to do that process and were examined by them. Same for Dustin before he was called to be the church planner, was approved by Presbytery. So yeah, we think that's just a really healthy way of doing things to make sure it's not loving for our congregations to let them call somebody to be their pastor who might not be qualified for any number of reasons, might not have the necessary skills, might not hold biblical beliefs, and he might be the most charismatic guy in the world, but he's not going to be preaching the gospel and preaching the Bible faithfully. And that's a responsibility of Presbytery. Aaron, were you going to say something before I jumped right in there?
Yeah, I was just going to say, regardless of how wise our form of government seems to be to us, which is very wise, if it were not biblical, we shouldn't do it.
Right.
So as you guys have been talking about regulative principle of worship, we have a regulative principle of the church and church government. And
Yes.
so go watch the link that Levi is going to point to about why it's biblical. And it is because it is the way God has designed it that it works well.
Right.
Now, all that said, ecclesiology, church government, is not the silver bullet that gets rid of all church problems. It can help us avoid some of the biggest pitfalls, but Presbyterian churches have problems, and our government, church government, doesn't solve all of those problems because they're rooted in sin. Ecclesiology is not the gospel. Only Jesus and his work can remove those effects of sin completely. So it's not perfect. It's not ever going to be perfect because sinful men are those who are given those responsibilities. So if you're I do think it works better, but if you're looking to come and become Presbyterian and think you'll never see a problem because I'm Presbyterian now, I have really bad news for you. Um, we have our own problems. But all that said, as has been said, I think specifically about democracy, is I think Presbyterianism is the worst form of church government except for all the other ones. And therefore, it is the best.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a great reminder. And yeah, we're not trying to say all this to imply that our churches are perfect by any means, but we do think this is a healthy, the best among the worst options, as Aaron just said, of how to govern our churches, and all of it again is dependent upon God's word and Christ. He is King and head of the church. He alone. So that's always a good reminder too, that our churches, our elders, everybody called to lead the churches, they're doing so under the authority of Christ. So that's always a good reminder.
Yep.
Well, we talked a bit about this already, but presbyteries are important. Presbyterianism is good, biblical, but what do presbyteries actually do? And when we talk to our folks and tell them that we're going to presbytery, and they think, "What are you doing? What is it that we're going to do? What kind of work are we doing when we go to presbytery?" Anybody want to take a stab at that?
Well, the first thing that we do is we worship.
Yeah.
And I very much look forward to our worship services. It is not perfunctory at all. And this is important for our folks to know that as teaching elders, as pastors, our church membership is not actually in our local congregation. Our church membership is at our presbytery, and so it is good and right for us to be together and to worship together, to worship with our brothers who are keeping us accountable, who know us, who love and help us, and so we start with worship. And I remember when Jonathan Dorst preached at the Presbytery meeting wherein I was transferred into the PCA, and I still remember his sermon and how the Lord convicted me on it about coveting and trusting Him. And so, anyway, this past Presbytery meeting, our former moderator Mike Philibert preached, and I always love hearing his sermons and his charges. They're just incredible. So the first thing we do is we worship.
One of the really great benefits of how that has played out in Hills and Plains is just about every time we include the Lord's Supper at the end of our worship services before we close that portion and get to business. And there is something spiritually beneficial about coming to the Lord's table with these men, and that being the framework that flows into the business where we may disagree strongly, and we may have strongly held beliefs and opinions on how we should be going about business, and we may vote, and there may be a close vote, and it goes one way or the other. Well, if that is framed with, we all belong to the same Lord and come to the same table, that actually gives us the freedom to disagree well, I think, because we're coming from the framework of, if I disagree with you on this, we're not calling each other heretics. We're not saying that you don't belong to Jesus and I do. This is all flowing out of, we are all united in Christ as one body in the church. And if we get to this point where we have disagreements, it doesn't undermine our union with Christ and communion with one another. And that's a beautiful spiritual means of grace for us that we've gotten to experience, tying worship to our business.
Yeah, dude, for sure. That's beautiful.
Well said. So yeah, we start with worship at our presbytery meetings, and we are a church. The PCA, it's a denomination, but it's the church. It's the Presbyterian Church in America, and we when we gather at any level, whether local or at Presbytery or General Assembly, we're gathering as the church. So that's a beautiful reminder. We gather, and the primary thing we're called to do always is to worship. And so we start our presbyteries with worship. And then, Aaron mentioned we start that, we take a break, and then we move to business. So it is a business meeting, but we do start with worship. We start with time together, and these are times when we might not see each other in person, except for these presbytery meetings from different pastors and elders across all our churches. So it's a great time just getting together with the brothers there as well. But then we move to work. And some of the big business kind of things that presbyteries are responsible for, we mentioned some of it, but credentialing candidates, we examine men who are either transferring into the presbytery, who are being ordained, and working on ordination within our current churches, within our presbytery. So that's something that we do. It's really important. We also, we're responsible to one another. So each of our churches submit our minutes and the records of our actions every year. We submit them to Presbytery, and then a committee of Presbytery reviews those records. And then if there's anything that might need looking at, or anything that might need to be corrected, or whatever it might be, Presbytery handles those things as well. Another important thing Presbytery does is, since Presbytery is a geographical area, it's within the job responsibility of the Presbytery to be thinking about church planting and saying, we need some churches here, we need a church there. So that's exactly what happened with Dustin and Gospel Fellowship in Springfield, where Dustin, he reached out to Presbytery because he was already feeling this calling that he'd want to plant a PCA church in Springfield. And the Presbytery also wants a PCA church in Springfield. So, that was a perfect match. But it was ultimately Presbytery who decides, we are planting a PCA church in Springfield. This is so different than really the way churches operate in the country today, where all it takes is just one guy. And he just says, I'm going to plant a church here. And now there's a church. But there's no oversight to that. There's no accountability. So Dustin, you didn't just decide, I'm going to plant a church and now the church exists, but there's a whole process, and Presbytery establishes this church. We call it a mission church. That's a church plant. And then they establish that, and then they call you to be the church planter now for that church, which I just think is a wonderful model of church planting, and I'm so grateful for it. So those are some of the things presbyteries do. That's some of the work assigned to us. What am I leaving out, or any thoughts on those things?
No, I think it's really good. It can be a little bit counterintuitive, but we think about the responsibility that the church has. There's a sense in which the Great Commission creates an urgency in us, and some people respond to that urgency by, I just have to go out and do this, and I as a sole person have to go and share the gospel and plant churches and do all these things, and there's that energy, and that entrepreneurial spirit is fantastic. But we are flawed, and we can get it. It's so easy for the enemy to pick off individuals, right? But when we're grouped and linked together, we're much stronger, such that, like, heaven forbid I die, somebody could come in and just take over, but anyway, but the process that we took, I met with the missions committee of Hills and Plains Presbytery back in October of 2022. So, almost 2.5 years ago. I had my first meeting with them, said, hey, I want to plant. And so we started we started the process, and it was 2 years later that we were able to have our first worship service. And that's, that's pretty quick. But that can seem so like, are you kidding me? To either a Southern Baptist church or a non-denominational church, just an individual, like, what? People were dying and going to hell, and you're taking years to get a church started. And it's like, well, yes, but that is much better. That's sounds so bizarre to say, but it's so much stronger and safer, and it can last. We're talking not just about going out and sharing the gospel with individuals, which we need to do, but we're talking about raising up a church, and using the metaphor of a young woman, right, who is growing, developing, and getting strong enough to where she can deliver and give birth to more churches. And the stronger she is, the healthier she is, she's able to continue to plant and give birth to more and more churches. That's a good thing,
Yep. Yeah, I totally agree. And so you mentioned the missions committee. So Aaron, what are some of the other committees that we have at Hills and Plains, and some of the other roles, or maybe just walk through what does a typical meeting look like? Maybe we could just do that and walk through the different things that we do and the committees that report and all that stuff.
Matt, one other thing that presbyteries do before I do that.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, because we are a court of, thank you, Mr. Moderator. Because we are a court of the church, we do discipline. And so, as Dustin mentioned, teaching elders are members of the presbytery. And so if there are church discipline matters for pastors, presbytery is who handles that, because that's where their membership is. But because we also are the level of accountability above local particular congregations, discipline issues can rise to presbytery. So if a session has a case where they are going through discipline with a member, that member has rights, not only before their session, but when they get to the end of process, they can appeal to presbytery if they feel like things were done wrong to them. It's not the end when the session has made their decision. They have rights to bring things to the higher courts of the church, which is really important. That's one of the ways that we have accountability for the churches in our presbytery, is their members have rights to bring things to us for us to consider. So discipline is also something really important that presbyteries do as a court of the church.
Yeah.
But as far as what does a meeting actually look like? We, being Presbyterian, love our committees. And so we set up our work running through several different committees so that they can do the groundwork, and they can do the dirty work and digging in between meetings of working through procedural details and getting information and having extra meetings and talking to people and bringing a summary of that work and the actions they want to see happen to a presbytery meeting. If we did everything from the floor, our presbytery meetings would be as long as General Assembly is every year, which nobody wants. So our committees are who bring most of the items that we discuss and we act on to the floor by giving reports. Whoever is the chairman of that committee will give a report, and we'll make recommendations to the presbytery on behalf of the committee. Here's what the committee thinks we should do. And then the presbytery will talk about that. We have an administrative committee, which is just everybody who is type A and knows how to make an Excel spreadsheet and likes reading the Book of Church Order as part of their nightly devotions. Yes. And the goal of the administrative committee is to keep us administratively in line, keep us efficient, keep us faithful to our rules for presbytery, the BCO, the standards themselves, to make sure that our work is getting done, it's getting done efficiently, and it's getting done correctly. We have candidates and credentials committee. We have a whole committee who is responsible for caring for men that are on the way to ordination. So we're not just a testing committee. who is setting the line here and making sure that nobody crosses it who shouldn't. But caring for men all along that way, encouraging them, praying for them. But most of what you see at Presbytery is we bring the men to the floor for examination. They will be examined in committee. They will do written and oral exams before committee. And they have to pass those before we'll even bring them to Presbytery and get a recommendation on, hey, we think this guy meets the qualifications to be licensed to preach or to be ordained. And that comes through a candidates and credentials committee. We have a spiritual formation committee. Their main responsibility is to help the presbytery in spiritual formation. That usually comes through planning the worship services at each presbytery meeting that we have. They also plan a yearly retreat that we do and the material that will go along with that. And they have some ideas on expanding even beyond just presbytery. We're talking about the possibility of a women's retreat, a presbytery-wide women's retreat that they're working with some people on, which I'm excited to hear more about. We have the review of session records committee, which is what Levi mentioned, where every single session every year has to send in the notes of what they did, and it gets reviewed by this committee, and they come to Presbytery and flag anything they think is worth a closer look or a deeper answer from our churches, just making sure that everything done is done decently and in order, as Presbyterians like to say. We have a missions committee. The missions committee, like Dustin mentioned, helps oversee the church planting within our geographical bounds, but it also connects us to missions work worldwide. How can the Presbytery be supporting mission work here, throughout the U.S., and abroad? So they kind of have maybe the broadest purview of any work of any of our committees. And in particular, they also are the committee that oversees our RUF work, our Reformed University Fellowship, our campus ministry. And then who am I forgetting? Pastoral Care Committee. We have a committee that is specifically for caring for our churches and our teaching elders. And they don't always have a lot of business for us. That a lot of their work is done not necessarily bringing things to the floor of Presbytery, but in those meetings and caring for our pastors and our churches in between. And then from time to time, we'll have ad hoc committees where we say, we need a specific task done. Let's set up a committee to do that task. We got a couple of those going on right now. And so they will report on their business until they have a recommendation for Presbytery, and then they ask to be dismissed. They say, we think we're done. If you think we're done, get rid of us, and they no longer exist. So typically a Presbytery meeting will work through those committee presentations, those recommendations, and we'll have debate from the floor on any recommendations that come. We'll have votes, and then the best and most popular motion is always the motion to adjourn at the end of business. Whoever makes that is the most popular guy at Presbytery.
That's funny.
Yep. Yeah. That's so. Hopefully, that gives you an idea of this is what Presbytery. Each Presbytery is can be organized a little bit differently. They might call their committee something a little different, but the work that's being done is the same across the PCA. There's 88, I believe, presbyteries across the country that are each doing the same work for all the churches within their area. And the reason why Aaron he knows all of this stuff like the back of his hand is because he's serving as our stated clerk right now of Presbytery. So Aaron, what is the stated clerk? What's your responsibility in that role for Presbytery?
Stated clerk is a really fancy word for secretary. So my responsibility as stated clerk is to take notes at our meetings, make sure that what we do is actually recorded properly, and then between meetings to handle communication on behalf of Presbytery. If there's some communication from a person or from a committee in Presbytery or from an organization outside of Presbytery that says, hey, we want to communicate with the Presbytery, that runs through me as the stated clerk. So I'm not an executive. I don't get to act on behalf of Presbytery. All I am is kind of the middleman between Presbytery and all of its committees all of the outside communications that we may get. But my responsibilities include working with the administrative committee and the moderators so that we prepare for our presbytery meetings, try to get them to go as smoothly as possible. And one of the ways that we do that is I'm putting together the docket, the agenda, the order of business, and I'm the one that's presenting that to Presbyterians, saying, here's how I recommend that we work through our business today, because I think it will be the most beneficial and the most efficient. And so that's why I'm communicating with everybody, and I know a lot of what they're doing, but it's not because I'm anybody special. It's because I am the repository of information.
Well, you do an incredible job. You really do. So we're so thankful for you. And so we have the stated clerk who does it. We have a moderator who, moderates, obviously runs the meeting. I'm privileged to be able to do that this year for Hills and Plains. And but I talked with Mike Philibert, who was our previous moderator. Dustin mentioned him. He preached for us this past Saturday at Presbytery. And I was asking him just a bunch of questions before I started this year. Just asked him a bunch of questions about what does a moderator do and how should I do this? How should I do that? And the answer to all my questions was always the same. It was Aaron. How do I do this? Aaron will do it. Well, who handles this? Just Aaron. That was the answer to every question.
That's right.
So yes, you do all the legwork, and it's wonderful. But it's been awesome to get to work with you doing that, and looking forward to our next Presbytery in May. Already coming right up.
Yeah.
So yeah, that was a good bit of information. We went for a while. Hopefully that was helpful for you guys, just to hear a bit more about how presbyteries function and work. Should we recap we mentioned at the beginning, so maybe just over the next 15 or so minutes, we can just do a little recap of Presbytery this past Saturday. February 8th, this past Saturday, 23rd stated meeting of the Hills and Plains Presbytery. We met there down in Trinity Presbyterian Church in Owasso, and wonderful, beautiful new building that they are just, I think he said 3 weeks. They've just been worshiping in there. So we got to worship in their new building. So if you're listening to this in the Owasso area, please go check out Trinity Presbyterian there. And that was wonderful. But any highlights from you guys from Presbytery on Saturday?
I think one of the things that I enjoyed the most, it was a very brief section of our meeting, but I think a really important one we had a study committee report on how to help people who have baptisms that don't necessarily fit in our exact structure, right? So not to go long here, but our BCO states that among other things, a person needs to be baptized by an ordained minister of the word, and sometimes people are baptized by their dad or something, or by a friend, or it wasn't at a church, or it wasn't in a worship service. And it's like, so these things somewhat don't fit in with our normal practices, but like, is that a baptism? How do we handle this? And so and that matters, right? You think about your own baptism, whether you were an infant, or you were a child, or an adult, or whatever, like your baptism matters to you, whether it's what you wanted, or like if it like I would have loved to have been baptized as an infant. What a great blessing. And that's okay, I don't have that, but anyway. So these are important matters, and we want to protect people and churches and pastors. And so there was a committee that examined that, and how to help people when they want communion, when they're unable to attend worship, but they would love to be served the Lord's Supper. How do we do that? And so that was one of the things that we did as a presbytery, and there's a link to that study report on our Hills and Plains website that you can look at. That was a meaningful an important section of our business that we conducted and heard the report this past weekend.
Yeah, that's a great example of one of those ad hoc committees that does that legwork for us. So instead of us at a presbytery meeting trying to discuss and debate these issues all together and taking a ton of time to do that, we said, let's put a committee together to go do that work for us, and then they'll report to us what they think, and then we can do whatever we want with that report. So what we did was we received that report as helpful advice for our churches and for our presbytery. So yeah, that was great to hear that report.
Something else we did is, as I mentioned in the series of graded courts, it's not just sessions and presbyteries, but we have General Assembly where all of the presbyteries have representation every summer when we meet. And so one of the things we did was we elected men to represent our presbytery at that meeting on various committees and in various works, which is an important thing to do so that we are participating at every level of the church courts, not only at sessions and presbyteries.
Yeah, and General Assembly, that meets once a year. So our presbytery meets 3 times a year to do this business for our churches. General Assembly meets once a year. It's always sometime in June. And this year it's in Chattanooga, Tennessee. And we're going to be there for that later this June. And yeah, there's various committees at the General Assembly level. And they do all kinds of work that's appropriate for the church to do as one church, together. And then presbyteries and churches get to send representatives, and presbyteries can nominate men to serve on certain committees and committee of commissioners. And we don't have time to get into all those distinctions right now, but all 3 of us are on some committees. So which committees or which ways are you both serving this June?
So I'll be joining the Covenant College committee.
Nice.
I'm on the Mission to the World Committee of Commissioners.
Okay.
And then I also was nominated for a permanent committee position for Committee of Constitutional Business. And I also was put on the review of presbytery records. So it's at the General Assembly level what that review of session records level is for the presbytery. The review of presbytery records meets together and reviews all of the presbytery minutes from all 88 presbyteries from the past year and reports to the General Assembly.
So if you haven't noticed yet or figured it out, Aaron loves being Presbyterian.
Mm-hmm.
And we love him for that. He does all that work. But so he mentioned MTW, that's Mission to the World, and Aaron's going to serve on a committee that will review what MTW has done this past year, and that's and Dustin's going to do the same thing for Covenant College, which is our denominational college. Because it's part of our denomination, it has the church has oversight over it, and the way the church exercises oversight over it, part of that is through this committee of commissioners that Dustin's going to serve on in General Assembly. I was elected for overtures, which I'm really honored and excited to do that. So the overtures committee is another part of the General Assembly where we'll receive the General Assembly receives various overtures on all kinds of things, actions that a presbytery will normally send an overture to General Assembly to take an action or to make changes to our Book of Church Order or things like that. And what the Overtures Committee does is it works on those things at a committee level, and then they send recommendations to the General Assembly, which is made up of 2,000 plus commissioners, to then vote yes or no on their recommendations on those overtures. So similar to how we do it at the presbytery level, instead of trying to do all the business all together, all 2,000 of us, we have these various committees that meet, do the legwork first, make recommendations to the General Assembly, and then those 2,000 plus commissioners can then vote on those recommendations. So a lot of fun, nerdy back and forth and committee interactions and all that stuff.
If you want, you can go to YouTube and watch past meetings, past General Assembly meetings. They're broken up into different sections and stuff. And I love watching those. And so does my wife. They're cool, I think, So
if you love
can
watching
even watch
those,
it.
What's that?
I was just gonna say you can even watch it live streamed as it is going on.
Yes. Yep. And if you enjoy watching that, you might be called to be a PCA, a pastor.
That's right.
Hey, one more thing that we did at Presbytery that I'd like to highlight before we run out of time is through candidates and credentials. Mm-hmm. We did a couple of different things. One is we heard from a man coming under care, and we accepted him under the care of Presbytery, which is that very first step on the track to ordination. It is not a fast track. Presbyterians don't do anything quick. We're always slow and deliberate in everything we do. But this is that very first step to hear his inward call to ministry. Why does he want to pursue gospel ministry? What does that look like? He's married, so does his wife support him in that? And give him our acceptance to continue that, and our promise to help care for him as he does that. Takes each step along the way. For the Presbytery has a responsibility now to walk with him all along that way. And then we did 2 licensure exams. So not just anyone can preach in a PCA church. In order to be able to preach regularly, is what our BCO says, you must be licensed by the Presbytery. I don't think we have like little driver's license with your picture on it or anything. Maybe that's something that we should come up with. Yeah. That way, we can have the PCA cop show up to a church and say, "Hey, can I see your license as you're preaching? I'm going to pull you over." But we had 2 men that were examined, and they're examined pretty thoroughly in several different areas, which includes their Christian experience. We want Christians to be our guys who are preaching. So we ask them questions to make sure they're Christians, but we ask them questions about theology and about the Bible and about polity, how the church works. And we were blessed to license 2 more men. So we have 2 more men that have the Presbytery's permission to go anywhere within our presbytery and to preach the gospel. And it's a beautiful thing because the fields are ready for harvest. We need more laborers. And what I love about having men that are licensed is not only are they pursuing ordination eventually, but that means that when one of us gets sick and we're scheduled to preach and we need somebody to fill in, that's 2 more guys on the roster that we can call and say, "Hey, you have the permission of Presbytery to come and do this. You've been vetted. I know and I have confidence because you've passed those exams that you can come and preach to my people and they will be edified."
Yep.
That's another blessing of the connectional nature of our presbytery in our form of government, that we have a ready-made list of qualified men that can preach for us, and I know I've benefited from that so much. Our Christ the King folks will know that we've had a lot of people fill in as needed, and for us it's been wonderful. A few other highlights. We did hear from all the other committees. If sometimes there's not any major business that committees are doing, but they'll still present some information to us. So we heard from the Spiritual Formation Committee and the Pastoral Care and the Missions Committee, and they had some items as well. But one of the informational things, and Dustin, not to put you on the spot, but there's going to be an upcoming missions conference, and you'll be presenting something there. So did you want to share that here with the good folks on the show?
Yeah. So Covenant Church in Fayetteville has for years and years had an annual missions conference, and maybe we can talk with Paul Sagan at some point, the pastor there at Covenant Church, about the different missionaries or different folks he's brought in to lead the sessions and stuff. So anyway, this year, Fred Greco, former moderator of the PCA for its 50th year General Assembly, he's presenting on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. He's preaching at the morning and evening services on Sunday, and then has a session following the future of the current state of the PCA from the perspective of a former moderator, which sounds so exciting. And again, if that's exciting to you, you might be Presbyterian. Anyway, but I get to share on Friday evening with the folks there. I've got a good slot of time there to talk about all that God is doing and desires that we have for gospel fellowship. The folks at Covenant Church support what we're doing at Gospel Fellowship, like so many other churches, like Christ Church and Christ the King. Supporting the work of Gospel Fellowship, which is just a huge benefit for our Presbyterian, for our church. But anyway, looking forward to that missions conference next weekend, the 21st, 22nd, and 23rd.
Awesome. Yeah, that'll be wonderful. So if you're able, and if you're in the Fayetteville area or willing to make that drive, definitely check that out. And I think they have that information on the Covenant Presbyterian Church website. I don't know their website off the top of my head, but we can link to it. And yeah, Dustin will be there on Friday, and it should be a fun weekend of hearing about how God is moving and planting his churches and doing that work. So that's exciting.
Yeah.
So you can check that out. You can check out hillsandplains.org is our website for our presbytery. A lot of the information we talked about on here is on there, including all of our churches are listed on there. That study report is listed on there as well, so you can go check that out if you want to. And if you'd want to, please let us know. And if you want to come and visit a presbytery meeting, we'd love to have you there. You could come as one of our guests and get to. It's open to you to see it and experience it, and it could be a fun time, and just get to see all the nuts and bolts of how we do things. So I think we've talked enough about Presbyterianism maybe for one day. But do you guys have anything else that you wanted to mention before we log off?
It's great to have you guys doing a lot of the day in, day out, or periodic work for the Presbytery. So that's what I have to say. Sneeze that out, So dumb.
Oh, well, Aaron, can you top that?
No, I probably can't, but thank you for letting me come and nerd out on Presbyterianism, because you're right. It is a disease, and it is infectious. My wife has caught it, and so she goes to Presbytery meetings for entertainment and enjoyment. And so be careful hanging out too closely to a Presbyterian. You may catch Presbyterianism.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right. Now, are either of your wives going to GA? We're talking about it. We're thinking Debbie might come.
Yeah, we're likely a no, just with we got how old will he be? He's 11 months right now. And so yeah, we're kind of in that I don't know what we do. So I don't know if Jess is gonna make it, but what about you, Aaron?
Negotiations are ongoing in the Rains household.
I love it. Yeah. Well, maybe. Yeah. Well, they'll have to do like
for our wives to maybe be interested. It's another thing for my 4, 8, and 10-year-old to be interested.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
They have wonderful family activities.
Yes, they do. They do a
I'm
lot
guessing.
of work.
I've never participated in them.
They have them,
but they look pretty
I haven't
great.
either. But no, yeah. But they do. I know they put a lot of work. I was talking to my old church in Richmond, where GA was in Richmond last year, and just hearing how much work they put in on all the everything that goes on around and at the same time of General Assembly. It's a lot of work. So should be a good time. We'll do a live from GA episode or something for sure. Live on location in Chattanooga. Awesome. All right. Well, we should wrap up. I hope this has been helpful to you. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you've made it to the end, oh my goodness, thank you.
Yeah.
You deserve a prize. We'll figure something out for you. But yeah, we do hope this has been helpful to you. Thank you so much. Let us know if you have any questions or comments, and we'll plan on being back next week. But again, as always, go to church.
Thank you for listening to another episode of Reforming the Ozarks. We would love to hear from you. You can reach us at reformingtheozarks@gmail.com. To learn more about our churches, visit ctkjoplin.com and gospelsgf.org. If you would like to partner with us in planting confessional and reformed churches right here in the Ozarks, go to gospelsgf.org and click on Make a Donation.